Okay, thank you everyone for joining us for the second seminar of the GLO seminar series. It is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Marie-Claire Villeval. Marie-Claire has done research in a number of areas in economics, but two of her main areas are experimental and behavioral economics. And today's paper is within that theme of her research. Just before I pass the virtual floor to Marie-Claire, just two things. One is that please type your questions in the Q&A using the Q&A function on the Zoom. Or if you want to ask directly, you can use the raise hand function, and then there will be Marie-Claire will be doing some poses as during the presentation, and she can answer some of those questions. And the second thing is that the webinar is being recorded, and it will be available early next week on the YouTube channel of the GLO. So Marie-Claire, thank you very much again for agreeing to present, and over to you. I'll mute myself now.
Thank you very much. So hello everyone, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. It's a great pleasure to give this talk, and thank you for inviting me to give the presentation, and thank you for attending this talk. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, I hope you can see it. Can you see it? Yeah? So
yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it's a talk about how parents teach social norms to their children, and it's based on a field experiment that I'm going to show you in a few minutes. And this is joint work with my two friends, Thijs Brouwer, who is a PhD student at Tilburg University, and Thijs will be on the job market next year, and Fabio Galeotti, who is my colleague here at GATE CNRS in Lyon. So why social norms? But social norms, because they are extremely important. They inform our individual behavior, they inform our social interactions in a variety of economic situations. And usually they are understood as behavioral patterns that are predominant within a group, that are supported by a shared understanding of what ought to be done in such or such circumstances, and that are sustained through the group social interactions. So basically, people comply with norms because they know that if they violate the norm, there's a risk that they are going to be punished by their peers. And so these peer punishment produce some stability in the norm, and so that they can reproduce over time. Now, most of the time in the literature, we consider that there is one norm, and that the norm is well established and clear for everyone and stable. But in reality, there are many cases in which there's a multiplicity of norms, and there is a normative uncertainty. And so let's take the example of the lockdown. During the lockdown, it was clear what we ought to do or not to do. But after the lockdown is lifted, it becomes less clear. So when do you have to wear the mask? Can you shake hands? Is it inappropriate? Well, we have to build new norms. So we are in a period of normative creativity to some extent. And so it shows that we need to learn norms in many cases. When we travel, in many circumstances, it's not clear which norm has to be implemented. So it means that we need to internalize norms and that we need to transmit norms. So we need to know more about teaching norms and learning norms. So the first circumstance in which you have to learn norms is when you are a kid, and most of the time you first learn the norm from your parents because you observe what they are going to do. So intergenerational transmission of norms is clearly crucial for the internalization of norms. I hope you can see my slides. There are some pictures on the slide. These pictures come from the Australian TV. It was a campaign that was broadcasted a few years ago on the Australian TV about violence and domestic violence. And the main theme was children see, children do. So if they can see their parents misbehaving, they are at high risk of misbehaving themselves later on. And so parents lead by example, they display the desired behavior, and this is the first best opportunity for people to learn that respecting norms, complying with norms is extremely important, otherwise you may be punished if you violate. Well, in the literature, in the economic literature, especially in behavioral economics, there are a few studies now that look at the behavior and the preferences of children and parents, but very few look at socialization efforts of parents. We know that there is a correlation between the parents and the children's preferences. Studies have shown that it's the case for risk attitudes, for example. So if your parents are more risk averse, you are more likely to be risk averse yourself. There's a correlation for time preferences. So more patient parents are usually associated with more patient children. And social preferences seem to be also correlated. Interestingly, the strength of the correlation increases with the parental involvement. So if parents invest more in the education of their children, they spend more time with them, the coefficient of correlation between parents and children's preferences gets higher. So again, it has been shown for risk, for trust, for time preferences, and competitiveness. So the involvement of parents in education, of course, is extremely important, also for the formation of social preferences. Now, if you look at the transmission itself, transmission of social preferences in particular, there are very, very little studies in economics. There are a few looking at social preferences, and they find that the parents of generous children tend to behave in a more generous way in dictator games when the child is present and can observe what the parent is choosing. But for public good games, there's no connection. So no difference whether the child is present or not. In the domain of honesty, there's a paper looking at whether parents are more or less likely to lie or cheat when they are alone compared to when a child is present. And again, they find that people cheat more when they are alone and when dishonesty benefits a child. And finally, there's a recent study by Capellan, Tungoden, and John List looking at, and Samia Ahmed, looking at the formation of social preferences and comparing the impact of early childhood interventions and a parenting program. And basically what they find is that the early childhood interventions have a more important impact on the transmission of social preferences compared to the parental involvement. But this is a very limited knowledge that we have right now, and nothing is related to norms, normative behavior. So this is what we are interested in. And I have to mention right now that we are interested mainly in the parents' transmission behavior, not in the children's preferences. So I won't be able to say anything at this stage about whether the parents' efforts translate into a change in the children's preferences. I only focus on the transmission behavior itself. So the first question is the following. Do parents engage more in norm enforcement in the presence of their child? In other words, are they more likely to punish norm violators when the child is present to teach her child that it's bad to misbehave? And it should inform us about the intergenerational transmission of norms from one generation to the next. And the second question is, suppose parents engage more in norm enforcement when the child is there. Does the nature of punishment change depending on the presence or absence of the child? And basically, we distinguish between direct punishment and indirect punishment. Is there a substitution between the two types of punishment when the child is present or not? So this is the main questions we are trying to address. Before I show you how we address this question, I just want to show you the different ways of teaching norms by punishing that have been identified in the literature. The first one is the most obvious one. It's direct punishment. So you confront a norm violator verbally to express your disapproval. So you express your disapproval to the person, or you ask this person to undo what he or she has just done, but there's a verbal expression of disapproval. And this is an explicit way of teaching the child that violating a norm can be punished. But there is also a risk of retaliation. I will come back to it later. So direct punishment may be risky, of course. And this risk of counter punishment probably explains why we find a lot of punishment of violations in the lab, but much less in the field. And probably because in the field, you fear being counter-punished by the violator. So there's a famous study by Balafoutas and Nikophorakis that they conducted in the metro of Athens, a Confederate littered on the metro stations, and they measure the reaction of people. And they find that only 4% of the bystanders or passengers directly punish a violator. So it's very, very little. And this type of study has been replicated in several countries with different cultures, and it's the same everywhere. The proportion of people who directly punish a violator is always extremely low. So typically there's another way to punish a violator, and it is indirect. And typically it's by withholding help. So it's indirect reciprocity. So you see someone violating a norm, and the same person needs help at some point. And you can see that the rate of helping decreases a lot after a norm violation. So again, Balafoutas et al., they have done another experiment in a train station. And there's a violator, and they look at, and the violator drops the content of the bag on the ground, and they look at the helping rate of the violator compared to a control condition in which there was no violation before dropping the content of the bag. And again, they find that after a violation, the helping rate decreases significantly and dramatically. And they show that there's a substitution between direct and indirect punishment. When there is an opportunity to indirectly punish, you use this opportunity instead of expressing verbally your disapproval. Now, in the presence of the child, it's less obvious what you can do here, because you want to show to the child that the non-violation is bad behavior. But at the same time, you also want to teach your child that helping someone in need is important. So there is a normative conflict here, and it's not clear how people will behave in the presence of the child. Will they use indirect punishment or not? Of course, there are other ways to punish a violator. It can be, for example, indirect reprimand. So you don't address directly the violator, but you could address a child about the violation. And you could do it by speaking loud so that the violator can hear you telling your child that this was bad behavior. So it's indirect reprimand. Another way is picking up litter. If someone has littered on the street, you can pick up the litter yourself. It may be considered as a punishment if the violator observes you picking up the litter, but it's not that clear, and it doesn't teach a child that non-violation has to be punished. It just make it salient that it is misbehavior, but it doesn't tell anything about punishment of violations. And finally, parents can explain the child in private. In that case, again, there's no sanction, so it doesn't teach a child that violations have to be punished. So in our experiment, we mainly focus on the direct punishment and indirect punishment. We control for indirect reprimand and picking up litter, but of course we cannot measure the direct explanation of the misconduct to the child. Huh? But we mainly focus on direct and indirect punishment. Now, I would like now to show you our approach and the design of our field experiment. Obviously, if you have any question about the design, don't wait until the end of the talk to ask. You can interrupt me at any time. So this is a field experiment that we conducted in the vicinity of primary schools in Lyon, in France, to study the reaction of parents to the violation of the non-littering norm. And we vary whether the child is present or not. Why littering? Well, we chose this type of violation because everyone agrees that it is a norm violation. So you cannot read it. It's written in French, unfortunately, but this is a graph that shows you the data from a poll with a representative sample of the French population. And the people were given a list of misbehavior, and they had to indicate for each behavior whether they found it unacceptable, blameworthy, somewhat blameworthy, or acceptable. And the first behavior that received the highest negative reaction was littering in public space. And the other behavior that came after were things like doing graffiti on the walls, or spitting on the ground, or speeding on the highway, etc. So people clearly consider that littering is bad behavior. In the same survey, they also asked people, what do you think is or would be the best policy intervention to fight against littering? And again, the first rated response by the respondents was educating more the children to respect the environment. And this is the first bar, and it comes before increasing sanctions and fines, increasing the information of citizens on the consequences of pollution, or increasing sanctions against companies who use for bad packaging, etc. So again, littering is important, and educating children seems to be a quite consensual view. So what did we do? So we provided parents with an opportunity to punish a violation, and directly or indirectly, with their child or when they are alone. And for violating the littering, non-littering norm, we recruited actors, professional actors. We didn't want to do that ourselves, not because we were afraid of violating a norm, but because we wanted actors who don't know what is exactly the purpose of our study, and professionals because we wanted these actors to play the scene exactly the same way for each observation. So we recruited a female and a male, and for each observation, we had one actor, 2 research assistants, and 1 supervisor. We did that in the vicinity of 30 public schools, elementary schools, and we targeted parents at the beginning of the school day, at the end of the school day, or extra scholar activities, so that parents arrive at school or leave the school, and depending on the time, they are with their child or they are alone, because they are alone when they have just left the child at school, so they go back to their job or at home, and so they are alone. But we can observe in the same setting parents who are alone or accompanied with a child in exactly the same environment in these different time slots. So we targeted parents so that there was only 1 adult per observation. So we excluded couples. We excluded also parents pushing strollers or having bags, holding bags, visibly having to rush or talking on the phone because we thought that they wouldn't pay attention. And so the actor didn't select the target and the scene. We instructed the actor which scene to play before a parent was targeted. So the design is inspired by the previous study of Balafoutas, Nikiforakis, and Rothenbach. So what is the role of the actor? Well, the actor holds a plastic bag with waste inside, a banana peel precisely. And the actor carries a shoulder bag containing pens and folders. The actor approaches the target parent from the front when there's almost no one around, at least no one who could possibly intervene in the scene. And at about 10 meters away, the actor pauses and starts going through the items in the bag. And at 5 meters away, the actor starts playing the scene. So we have different scenes that constitutes our treatments. There are 3 main conditions. What we call the violation plus help, to study indirect or substitution between direct and indirect punishment. Violation, help. So let me describe these 3 treatments. So before that, this is just a picture of the materials we used and the actress. So the violation plus help treatment. So here the actor clearly, intentionally throws the waste on the ground. And the way it is thrown on the ground is clearly away from the child because we didn't want to create any risk. And so the plastic bag had to be thrown really on the side of the sidewalk. Then the actor moves again after throwing the bag while taking out the content of the bag. And so accidentally, the actor drops the content of the bag on the ground. Waits a few moments before starting to pick up the items. So it gives the parents an opportunity to help if the parent wants to help. Now, the violation condition, here, it's exactly the same at the beginning of the treatment. So the actor, again, clearly, intentionally throw the waste on the sidewalk, but he doesn't drop his bag. He doesn't drop the content of the bag, okay? So the difference with the previous treatment is here, if the parent is willing to punish the violation, he has to do it directly by expressing verbally his disapproval or her disapproval. And finally, we have the third treatment, the help condition. Here, the actor doesn't litter, but simply drops the content of the bag. Why did we need this treatment? because we need to know what is the baseline rate of helping to appreciate how and whether help is reduced, or the likelihood of help is reduced after a violation. So we are not especially interested in this condition, but it is a control for measuring the impact of the violation on indirect punishment. The last elements about the design, the research assistants. So we had two research assistants. One was in charge of observing the scene from distance and taking note on all the details of the scene. So the number of the children with the parents, the reaction of the parents, the number of people who could have seen and intervened, the weather, the time of the day, etc. So taking note of all the elements of the setting. And we had a second research assistant that was completely independent. And the role of the second research assistant was to conduct a short and unrelated survey with the parents that were the targets of the experiment. But there was, for the parents, absolutely no link between the different situations. So why did we conduct this interview? It was only to know whether the adult is a parent of the child, or simply someone who has a custody of the children of the child. It may be a nanny, it may be a neighbor, and it's possible that the willingness to educate the child is different for a nanny and for the parent. So we wanted to have a control to see whether non-parents had the same behavior or a different behavior compared to parents. So in this survey, it was a very short survey, apparently about the quality of the environment. And at the end of these two questions, we asked them whether the child was their own child, or a child that the person was guarding, or the child of a relative or a neighbor. And we also asked the age of the child and the gender. Of course, not everyone is willing to spend time answering the questionnaire. And I think we had only 45% of the parents who agreed to participate. So we lack observation, of course. But for those people who agreed to answer, 90% were the direct parent of the child. So it suggests that for the vast majority of our observations, we observe the behavior of the actual parents of the child. So to recap, we have a 3x2 design. So the violation, the help, and the help and violation treatment. We have a condition with a child present and one in which the parent is alone. And in total, we have 601, it's a mistake, it's 600 observations. Well, we have 601, but the target was 600. So we kept the additional observation. So we have 100, basically 100 in each cell. And as I said before, the data were collected in 30 schools. And we collected the data in one school only during one day, because it allowed us in the afternoon to make sure that we didn't target twice the same parent, because we could remember whom we targeted in the morning. And we didn't want to stay longer than one day in a school because we feared being identified. And so one day, one school, and about 20 observations per day. And this study was pre-registered. And of course, we had an IRB for doing this. We have a number of controls. You know, in France, for public schools, you cannot choose the school for your children. The school is determined by where you live. So we couldn't ask parents how much they earned. So we don't know their income level, but we know the average income and the average poverty rate in sub-municipal areas. So we have some control for that. And in addition, the research assistant had to give their impression about the wealth of the person. So it's just subjective, but it also complements our classification. We control for the gender of the parent, the gender of the child, the gender of the actor, the weather, the time of the day, the rank of arrival of the parent at school, etc. So we have a number of additional controls so that we can have some robustness tests to enter into our analysis. Huh? And finally, before perhaps you have questions about the design, but perhaps I should stop for a few minutes here so that if you have questions, please answer them.
I haven't seen anybody raise their hand, but I have a very quick question. I mean, this RA2 who was surveying, doing the survey, asking questions to parents, I was wondering why didn't you think another couple of minutes to collect sort of socioeconomic background or their education level or something like that? Would that be reduce the number of people who would answer the survey? Was that the reason?
Well, yes, because I mean, you know, when parents arrive at school with the kids, they may be in a hurry. Some people have time and they stay to talk to other people there, but many people they have to rush more or less, and so they don't want to spend time answering questionnaires. And so for us it was really important to know whether it was a parent or not, and the rest was interesting but less important. And even with this very short questionnaire, because we had 5 questions in total, as I said before, we have only 40% of parents who agree to answer this very brief questionnaire. And so we thought that in addition to that, asking the income level would have been felt as a bit intrusive and surprising for people, having to say how much money they earn. I mean, at least in France. In the US, perhaps it wouldn't be a problem, but in France, people are still very reluctant to say how much they earn. And so we thought that, well, at least we know the average income in this neighborhood. So it gives us an indirect information about the level, the average level of wealth and poverty in the district of the school. And well, it's not perfect, of course, but it's enough. So we wanted to have not risking to lose too many observations. Of course, we could have asked this question on income as the last question. We could have done that. We didn't.
Okay, no, that's I just interested. I mean, if you know the education of the parents, I thought it might just add a little bit to the.
Yeah, there are many things that could be useful to know to see whether we find difference. But well, I will come back to that later if you like, because I can show you what we find for the district income. So remind me if I forget to mention this. No more questions about the design? It's clear?
Yeah, nobody has any questions, seems.
So before I show you the results or the conjectures, the definitions, we stick to the literature. So what we call helping, so that is coded 1 or 0, it is coded 1 if the parent picks at least one item. So when the actor drops the content of the bag, to be coded as helping, the parent has to take at least one item. For direct punishment, again, it's coded 1 if the parent addresses the actor verbally about the norm violation or asking the actor to pick up the litter. So it must be clear that it is talking to the actor to express disapproval. And this was, of course, heard by the actor and by the first research assistant, who could see and hear what was going on. And what we call indirect punishment it is measured by the difference in the helping rate between the help and violation condition on the one hand and the help condition on the other hand. So the difference in helping rate indicates or captures indirect punishment. So you withhold help to punish indirectly the violator. So this is the definitions of the main variables. Now the conjectures. Of course, the psychologists, they have studied social learning for decades. And based on this literature in psychology, our first conjecture is that we expect to see a higher direct punishment rate in the presence of the child than in the absence of the child. So in the violation treatment, punishment rate should be higher in the child condition. Based on the same type of literature and also the previous economic experiments on this topic, we also anticipate that the parents will be more likely to help the actor in the presence of the child when no norm was violated before. So in the help condition, we expect that the targeted parents will help more when the child is with them if they want to teach a norm to the child. Now, the impact of the indirect punishment. Indirect punishment, as I said before, may be more likely because it avoids the risk of counter punishment. So retaliation is less likely. And so our third conjecture is that parents will withhold help more after the violation in the presence of the child, so that we can compare the difference in helping rate in the two treatments when the parent is alone and when the parent is with the child. And we expect that people will substitute more in the presence of the child than when they are alone. Now, of course, it's a bit more complex for this indirect punishment because there are conflicting motives between teaching and helping. The teaching benefits may be smaller with indirect punishment because the kid has to understand that not helping, withholding help means punishing indirectly. So it's less easy to understand. So it's possible that the parent will reinforce the behavior by disapproving also to explain the child that if he doesn't help or if she doesn't help, it is because this person misbehaved before. So it is more complicated, this substitution in the presence of the child, of course. So if the design is clear, let me show you the main result and then the robustness test. So the first is to test conjecture 1, we want to study punishment rate or direct punishment rate in the violation treatment. And what you can see on the screen is the alone condition. And this is a direct punishment rate. So you see it's 11% of parents. So only 11% of parents express verbally their disapproval to the violator. This is very consistent with the percentages that was found in the Metro of Athens, for example. They found 4%, we found 11%, but it's relatively close. So it means that the vast majority of people, they don't say anything. Perhaps because they fear being punched in the face or, well, they don't say anything for the vast majority. Now, what happens when there is a child? Well, the punishment rate doubles. It goes from 11 to 22%. So when the child is present, the parents are much more likely to express verbally their disapproval to the actor. And this is significant at 5% level. So apparently the presence of the child changes the way people use direct punishment. What happens for the helping rate? So this is a helping rate in the help condition, so when there was no violation. So here we have 1/4 of the parents that are willing to help the actor who has dropped the bag, the content of the bag, when they're alone. What happens when the child is there? It doubles. So it's the same type of effect. When the child is present, the parents are clearly willing to show the child that helping is important. It's good behavior. So when there was no violation, there's a clear impact of the presence of the child. They are more willing to help to show the child that what is a good behavior? Good behavior is to help. Now, what happens in the more complex treatment, so the violation plus help treatment? So these two bars are the helping rates that I've just shown you. But now, after a violation, what happens? You see that when the child is present, so after the violation, it's yellow bars. The helping rate decreases significantly. So clearly the parents are withholding help as a way to punish the violator. They are less willing to help in the presence of the child. What happens when they are alone? Well, it decreases also. So it goes in the same direction. It goes from 25% to 17%. It's the two left bars, but the difference is not significant. So it goes in the right direction, but not significantly so. And the helping rate is still higher in the child condition after a violation. And the drop in help is not significantly higher in the child versus the alone condition. So we do not support our third conjecture. So parents help less after a violation, but do they substitute to direct punishment? So here I show you again the direct punishment rate in the violation condition. What happens in the violation plus help with the child? You see that the direct punishment almost disappears. If there was a violation before, the parent helps less, but they also stop using direct punishment. So they substitute the indirect for the direct punishment. They change the norm. Now, what happens in the alone condition? In the alone condition, again, parents are less likely to verbally express the disapproval. So it goes the same direction, but it is not significantly different. So it's only in the child condition that we find a substitution between the direct and indirect punishment. Well, this stronger substitution effect in the presence of the child is interesting because it helps us reject other possible interpretation. Because you could tell me, well, but if the parent is more willing to punish directly a violator, it may be for image concerns, right? It may be because I teach my children that it's bad to misbehave, but if I have an opportunity to punish and I don't do it, I don't respect my own instructions, right? And so it's possible for image concerns, the parents punish more after a violation. In that case, it has nothing to do with education, it's just image concerns. Well, if it was a case, if it was in explanation, we shouldn't see a substitution. If it was just for image, in that case, the parent should continue to directly, verbally punish a violator to show his child that he is strong. So we reject the image interpretation. A second possible story would be the fear of retaliation. Perhaps parents punish more directly a violator in the presence of the child because they fear less retaliation. To some extent, the presence of the child protects the parents against counter punishment. Again, we can reject this interpretation because if there was no fear of retaliation because of the child, we shouldn't see a substitution effect of indirect and direct punishment. So this substitution also helps us to reject the lower fear of retaliation. If any, it is exactly the opposite. The parents fear more retaliation in the presence of the child. And so these results help us to interpret our findings in terms of teaching norms. I insisted on the graph because you can see many things on the graph, but we did also some regression analysis, and we have also robustness tests in the paper. But basically, they confirm what you have seen on the figures. Perhaps some element that you can see also in the regressions. In fact, for the decision to punish, it is the fathers who punish more. So and again, it tends to support the higher fear of retaliation. It's only the parents the fathers, who are more willing to directly punish a violator compared to the mothers. The gender of the actor has no impact on this. But if you look at the decision to help, we don't find a difference between mothers and fathers, but we observe that the parents in general are less willing to help a male actor. So they are willing to help a female who drops the content of her bag, but males, if they drop the content of their bags, well, they can take care of it by themselves. We also control, we have a number of controls for the time and or rank of arrival. Because of course, if we need to have a balance across conditions for the degree of patience of parents, if you like. So we want to see whether parents who arrive earlier at school, perhaps they have specific characteristics, or they don't have to rush, or they are very serious people, or I don't know. So we want to see whether the time of arrival matters. So are people who arrive at the last minute less willing to help, for example? We need to control for that. So we have created a number of variables to control for the time, the exact time of arrival before the beginning of the courses. We control for the rank of arrival, etc. Regardless of the variable we include, it's never significant. So we don't find any effect of the time of arrival. Now, the last important point is, I will be brief and I will conclude. The last important point is it really teaching or is it responding to different norms? Because it's possible that in the presence of the child, people perceive the norm differently. It's possible that littering is perceived as a stronger violation in the presence of the child, or that helping someone else is a stronger norm in the presence of the child. And so in that case, what we measure is not teaching, it's just different norms. So to have a measure of this, we did an online vignette study in the 80 primary schools in Lyon with parents, and we elicit norms. And we use a standard technique in experimental economics to elicit the appropriateness of behavior. It's incentivized. Huh? It's what we call the Krupka-Weber method. So we ask people, it's a coordination game. We ask people to guess what is a model judgment of certain behavior. So they have to not to report what they think is appropriate or inappropriate, but what they think the majority of respondents considers as being appropriate or inappropriate. And in fact, in the vignette, we just described the different scenarios and the different possible reactions of the parents. So we had 500 respondents. And basically, we find that the violation is not seen as more inappropriate in the presence of the child. So the violation, when it's described exactly like in the experiment, is not perceived differently in the presence of the child. And the norm of punishing a violator or helping or withholding help after a violation, it's not significantly different when in the vignette we introduce a child or when there is no child. So again, we consider that it supports the interpretation of the results in terms of teaching. So let me wrap up very briefly. We find with this field experiment a higher engagement of parents in norm enforcement when their child is present. They are more likely to directly punish violators. They are more likely to help people in need, and but they are not more likely to withhold help as an indirect punishment of violators. But they substitute indirect for direct punishment. it's clear evidence of parental education as a strong vector of norm transmission in the societies. And of course, there are many extensions that you could think of, other types of violations. Heterogeneity, I didn't say much about it, but perhaps I can come back to this point to answer your questions. An important dimension is that we look at teaching, we don't look at learning. It would be very interesting to be able to connect the two parts and see whether parents who are more likely to teach have children who are also more likely to learn or better learn as tested in a subsequent experiment. Or, well, this is another study that we should do to see how teaching translates into learning, but this is left for further studies. So I thank you very much, and I would be happy to respond to your questions if you have questions.
Well, thank you so much for a very interesting presentation, very clear. I'm sure there is a round of applause, a virtual round of applause going around the world. So we are open for questions. But it seems that, okay, so while people are thinking about their questions, just one thing that I was thinking about, but was it could be that it's kind of instigated, the urge to help is instigated by the child. So, or punishment or whatever, you know, look daddy or look mommy, they have done this. And so the education took place in a way earlier, or at, you know, sort of in at home or in general kind of living in that environment. And so they behave differently in when the child was there, because it was instigated in a way by the child.
Well, so of course we cannot observe what people do at home, but we can measure whether the child, for example, is willing to help in the street in our design. I think I have a slide. No, this is something else. I don't have it, but we measure whether the child runs for helping, for example. We have very few. Huh? We have less than 5% of the observations in which a child does it. In the robustness test, we control for that. Excluding or including this observation doesn't change the main results. But I agree with you that, of course, education starts at home. But it's still, it doesn't contradict our interpretation, I think, because even if you teach your children at home, if you are given an opportunity to teach in the field, you are more likely to do it also, right? So it's possible, perhaps even likely, that the parents who are more willing to enforce the norm in the street when their child is there are also more willing to do it at home. That's very likely, but that, of course, we cannot observe it.
Yeah. Well, that's,
perhaps I could answer your previous question about, because yes. I realized I didn't. So in the regressions, we control for the IRIS, or IRIS is infra-municipal areas. So we have the average income and poverty rate. And so again, we try different ways to include that in the regressions. It never changes the impact of the presence of the child. The only difference we have is for direct punishment. In the poor areas or in the poorer areas, parents in general are less likely to directly punish the violator. But the presence of the child has the same effect and the same magnitude in the poor areas and in the richer areas. So there are some differences, and it is the same for the poverty. So differences in the basic rate, but no difference in the effect of the presence of the child.
Right.
Now, it would be interesting, of course, to have a more diversified, because we did that only in the city of Lyon. It would perhaps be interesting to explore poorer suburbs or richer suburbs to see whether there are differences. But at least in what we have, we don't seem to find a difference in the in the effect of the presence of the child depending on the socioeconomic status of the area.
Okay. No, that's quite convincing, I think. There are two questions or two people. I'll unmute Esteban. Esteban, you can talk now. And then there's another question in the chat. Oh. Esteban?
He needs to unmute the mic.
Yeah, I unmuted, I thought.
Perhaps I can answer the other question I've seen by John. So
yeah.
What is the role of political preferences by a region? Again, we don't, well, of course, we only do the experiment in the city of Lyon. Of course, there are different political parties have different shares across the areas, but as I said just before, we don't have a significant effect depending on the area. The share of, for example, extreme right parties, but in Lyon, I mean, we don't have. So it would be interesting perhaps to see other suburbs with indeed not only the income level, but also the dominant political perception, and indeed redoing the same experiment in cities where the Front National has been elected recently could be an interesting test, at least for the direct punishment. It's possible that in places where people are more extreme right, I mean, it's possible that they would be more likely to express verbally their disapproval. But this is just a conjecture. I don't know. It would be interesting to test.
Marie-Claire, there is one in the chat. Can you access the chat? There's by Jana.
So John, I answered, I think, John's question.
Sure.
Yeah,
no, not John. Are there any differences? Is that the one that you are?
Yeah, the political preference by region. Yeah.
No. So in the chat, not in the Q&A.
Oh,
there's this, are there any differences in the teaching rates by mothers and fathers, and eventually the substituting?
Sorry, I can't see the question. So what we find is that for helping, there's no difference between fathers and mothers. Also, no difference in the matching female actress, female parent, etc. So we don't have this. The only place where we find a significant gender difference is for the direct punishment, and the fathers are more likely to verbally express the disapproval in the presence of the child, which suggests again that there is a fear of retaliation. And I think there's kind of consensus now that if people don't express directly their disapproval in the streets, it's because they fear to be aggressed or counter-punished. And this is even more so in the presence of the child. At least our results point to that direction. And so it's not that surprising that it is the fathers who are more likely to express verbally their disapproval. In the study in the metro of Athens, I think they found an effect of the height, and they found that indeed the people who were willing to punish directly were people who were taller and stronger. And so the fact that we find that the fathers are more likely to implement the direct punishment goes in the same direction.
I think we are end of our time as well, actually perfect timing. And let me see if there are, so you have answered John's questions, it seems. He has one last question, COVID related question.
Yeah, related to violence. I think it would be very interesting. I agree. I absolutely agree. Yeah.
Great. Thanks a lot, Marie-Claire, again for the seminar, for such an interesting topic as well. And thank you for all the participants. We'll have our next seminar on, I think, 6th of August. But until then, goodbye. Bye, Marie Claire.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Bye.